The Allen family vanished from Mount Rainier National Park on August 14, 2012. David, his wife Sarah, and their two young children, Chloe and Leo, drove into the park's sprawling wilderness for a final summer camping trip and were never seen again. Their tent, their vehicle, and all their belongings were found undisturbed, as if they had simply been erased from existence. For 9 long years, the case grew colder than the glacial peaks that shadowed their last known location. It became a chilling piece of Pacific Northwest folklore, a story whispered around campfires about the family who walked into the woods and dissolved into the mist. Investigators hit dead end after dead end, and the search was eventually abandoned, leaving only a void of unanswered questions and the unending grief of their relatives. The mystery seemed destined to remain unsolved, a permanent scar on the majestic landscape. For 9 years, the truth lay dormant, buried under layers of time, rock, and lies, until a cold case detective, a retired hiker, and a single overlooked photograph taken miles from the campsite would combine in a stunning twist of fate to expose a secret far more sinister than anyone could have ever imagined. The discovery would not only solve the mystery of what happened to the Allens, but would also unravel a dark conspiracy hidden in the heart of the wilderness, proving that sometimes the smallest detail holds the key to the most unfathomable truths. To understand the depth of the tragedy, you have to understand the life that was lost. The Allens were not just names on a missing persons poster. They were a vibrant, loving family from a quiet, tree-lined suburb of Seattle. David Allen, at 36, was a man caught between the practical demands of life and the pull of his passions. By trade, he was a geologist for a large engineering firm, a job that paid the bills but barely scratched the surface of his fascination with the earth. His colleagues described him as brilliant but restless, a man whose mind was always wandering to the tectonic plates beneath his feet, or the mineral compositions of the mountains he could see from his office window. His true dream, the one he spoke of late at night with his wife, was to start his own geological consulting firm. He wanted to be the expert that developers and prospectors sought out, a man who could read the story of the land like a book. This camping trip to Mount Rainier was, in his mind, a final deep breath of freedom before he planned to tender his resignation and pour his life savings into Allen Geotechnical Solutions. He was a dreamer, an optimist, a father who saw the world as a grand, explorable puzzle. Sarah Allen, 34, was the anchor to David's soaring kite. A pediatric nurse, she was pragmatic, organized, and possessed a quiet strength that held the family together. Where David saw geological wonders, Sarah saw potential dangers. She was the one who packed the extra bandages, the emergency blankets, and the bear spray. She tempered David's adventurous spirit with a dose of loving caution. Their friends described their marriage as a perfect balance of forces. He encouraged her to see the magic in the world, and she made sure they all got home safely. She supported his dream of starting a new company, not because she fully understood the financial risks, but because she understood him. She knew that David needed to chase the horizon, and she loved him for it. Her world revolved around her children, and her greatest joy was found in the simple moments, reading bedtime stories, baking cookies, and watching her kids discover the world with wide-eyed wonder. Their 2 children were the center of their universe. Chloe, at 8 years old, was a miniature version of her father. She had his insatiable curiosity and a budding love for science. She collected rocks, leaves, and insects, carefully labeling them in shoe boxes she kept under her bed. She was her dad's little shadow on hikes, peppering him with questions about why the rocks were a certain color or how the mountains were formed. David had just bought her a junior geology hammer for her birthday, and she had insisted on bringing it on the trip. Leo, at 6, was all his mother. He was quieter, more cautious, a sweet and sensitive boy who was happiest when holding his mother's hand. He loved stories of brave knights and friendly dragons, and was nervous about the idea of sleeping outside with wild animals. Sarah had promised him that she would be his brave knight, and that the tent was a magical castle that nothing could get into. The family dynamic was one of deep, palpable affection. Their home was filled with finger paintings taped to the refrigerator, half-finished Lego projects on the living room floor, and the constant sound of laughter. They were deeply embedded in their community. David coached Leo's t-ball team, and Sarah volunteered at the school library. They hosted neighborhood barbecues in their backyard, the smell of grilled burgers mixing with the scent of freshly cut grass. They had plans, dreams, and a future that seemed as solid and promising as the mountains they loved to explore. The trip to Mount Rainier was meant to be a celebration of that future, a final family adventure before the start of a new school year and a new business venture. They had everything to live for. The emotional stakes were not just about a single family. They were about the interruption of this beautiful, ordinary, and profoundly happy life. The mystery of their disappearance was so haunting because the life they vanished from was so full, so relatable, and so rich with love and promise. It was a life that no one could imagine simply ceasing to exist without a trace. The final hours of the Allen family's known existence began with the familiar hum of their Subaru Forester on the highway heading east from Seattle. It was Tuesday, August 14th, a day that dawned with the crisp, clean air of late summer in the Pacific Northwest. The mood inside the car was buoyant. Chloe was in the back, meticulously organizing her rock collection in a tackle box, while Leo pointed out every cow and horse they passed with squeals of delight. Sarah rode in the passenger seat, navigating with a paper map spread across her lap, occasionally glancing back to smile at the children. David was at the wheel, a picture of contentment. He was singing along to an old rock song on the radio, his fingers tapping out the beat on the steering wheel. To him, this wasn't just a camping trip. It was a pilgrimage. Mount Rainier was his cathedral, a place of immense geological power and beauty. They stopped for lunch at a small diner in a town just outside the park entrance. The waitress, a woman named Carol who had worked there for 30 years, would later recall them vividly. She remembered how David had explained the difference between strata and scree to a captivated Chloe over a plate of French fries. She remembered Sarah patiently cutting Leo's pancakes into small, manageable bites. They were, in her words, a picture-perfect family, polite, happy, and radiating a gentle warmth. They paid in cash and left her a generous tip. After entering the park, David decided to bypass the more crowded, popular campgrounds like Cougar Rock and Ohanapekosh. He was looking for something more authentic, more isolated. The real magic happens where there are no crowds, he told Sarah, who gave him a familiar, slightly weary look of acquiescence. He consulted his specialized topographical maps, a series he trusted more than the official park brochures, and chose a destination deep within the park's northeast corner, the White River Campground. It was more remote, a base camp for serious climbers tackling the mountain's treacherous Emmons Glacier route. Upon arrival, even White River felt too civilized for David. He drove through the designated loops, shaking his head at the other tents and RVs. He spotted a small, unpaved service road branching off from the main campground loop. A small sign indicated it was for authorized vehicles only, but the chain was down. "Let's just see what's down here," he said, a glint of adventure in his eye. "We'll just be for one night. No one will even know we're here." This was the first of a series of small, seemingly inconsequential decisions that would later be scrutinized endlessly by investigators. Sarah expressed a flicker of unease. "David, I don't know. The sign says..." But David was already turning the wheel. "It'll be an adventure, Sar. The kids will love it. We'll have a spot all to ourselves right by the river." They drove a few hundred yards down the bumpy track until they found a small, secluded clearing, shielded by a thick stand of Douglas firs, and just a short walk from the rushing, glacier-fed White River. It was idyllic. It was also completely invisible from the main campground and had no official site number. While they were setting up their large blue and gray 6-person tent, a park ranger in a dusty pickup truck drove slowly down the service road. He stopped and rolled down his window. Ranger Frank Miller, a seasoned veteran of the park, would later give a statement. He had advised David that camping in an unauthorized area was against park regulations and could be unsafe. He noted the approaching change in the weather system. The forecast called for a potential storm front moving in overnight, which could bring high winds and heavy rain, unusual for August. David was charming and persuasive. He explained he was a geologist and was just taking some soil samples, and they would be gone first thing in the morning. He assured the ranger they were experienced campers, fully equipped for any conditions. Miller, seeing the well-organized gear and the happy family, reluctantly agreed to let them stay for the single night, making a mental note to check on them in the morning. "Just be safe," he said before driving away. "This mountain doesn't forgive mistakes." His words, meant as casual advice, would hang in the air with prophetic weight. As dusk began to settle, a deep chill seeped out of the forest. They built a small, tidy campfire. David grilled hot dogs while the kids roasted marshmallows, their faces glowing in the firelight. Chloe showed her mother the new special rock she had found, a piece of quartz with what looked like flecks of gold in it. David had examined it and chuckled, telling her it was just pyrite, fool's gold, but that it was a beautiful find nonetheless. As darkness enveloped them completely, the temperature dropped. The wind began to pick up, rustling the high branches of the firs with a low, mournful sound. Leo, growing nervous, huddled close to Sarah, who wrapped him in a thick wool blanket and began telling him a story about a friendly bear who lived in the mountain and protected lost campers. At around 9:30 p.m., they extinguished the fire, dousing it thoroughly with water from a jug, a testament to their responsible camping habits. They zipped themselves into the tent, their 4 sleeping bags laid out side by side. The last traces of their existence were the faint smell of wood smoke and the low murmur of their voices from within the blue tent, soon swallowed by the rising wind and the vast, indifferent wilderness. What happened next would remain a perfect, terrifying mystery for years. The morning of August 15th broke cold and damp. A thick, persistent drizzle fell from a low-hanging gray sky, the remnants of the overnight storm that had swept through the high country. The world was washed in shades of gray and green, the vibrant colors of the previous day muted by the wet. At the main White River campground, campers emerged from their tents, grumbling about the miserable weather as they fired up their camp stoves for coffee. The secluded clearing where the Allen family had made their camp was unnervingly still. The only sound was the rhythmic dripping of water from the fir trees and the constant roar of the nearby river. Around 10 a.m., Ranger Frank Miller, true to his word, decided to drive down the service road to check on the family he had spoken to the day before. He had felt a small, nagging sense of unease since their conversation, a feeling he couldn't quite shake. As he pulled his truck up to the clearing, the first thing he noticed was the silence. There was no chatter, no clatter of breakfast being made, no sign of children playing. The family's dark green Subaru Forester was parked exactly where it had been. The large blue tent was still standing, its rainfly sagging slightly under the weight of the accumulated water. "Hello?" Miller called out, his voice sounding loud in the quiet clearing. "Park service. Everyone okay in there?" There was no reply. He walked closer to the tent. The main zipper was closed. He called out again, louder this time. "This is Ranger Miller. Is anyone in there?" Still nothing but the sound of the rain. A cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. This was wrong. Even if they were sleeping in, the kids would be stirring. He cautiously reached out and pulled the zipper tab. The zipping sound was jarringly loud. He pulled back the flap and peered inside. The interior was empty, but it was pristine. 4 sleeping bags were unzipped and lay neatly in a row. A book Sarah had been reading lay open on her sleeping bag. A small stuffed dragon, Leo's, was tucked into his. Chloe's geology hammer and her box of rocks were sitting by her bag. It was as if the family had simply evaporated. Miller's heart began to pound. He backed away from the tent and did a quick sweep of the immediate area. He found their camp chairs still arranged around the cold, dark fire pit. The cooler was closed and sitting next to the picnic table. He walked over to the Subaru. He cupped his hands and looked inside. On the passenger seat, he could see Sarah's purse. On the center console sat 2 smartphones and a set of car keys. He tried the driver's side door. It was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. Everything of value. Everything a person would need to function in the modern world. Wallets, IDs, phones, money, car keys, was all here. The only things missing were the 4 people. His training kicked in. He immediately backed away from the vehicle, careful not to disturb anything. This was no longer a welfare check. It was a potential crime scene. He retreated to his truck, his mind racing through the possibilities. Did they go for a pre-dawn hike and get lost? Unlikely, given the terrible weather and the fact they'd left everything behind. A wild animal attack? There were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no torn clothing, no tracks. The campsite was eerily, impossibly clean. He grabbed the radio from his dashboard. The call he made to Park Dispatch was logged at 10:17 a.m. His voice, recorded for the official log, was tight with controlled urgency. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Miller at White River. I'm at an unauthorized campsite off Service Road 7. I've got a family of 4. The Allens, vehicle and all property are here, but the subjects are missing. Repeat, the entire family is unaccounted for. The scene is strange. Requesting immediate backup and initiation of a search and rescue protocol. There are no signs of foul play, but there are also no signs of life." The dispatcher's voice crackled back, asking for clarification. Miller's reply was stark. "I don't know how to clarify. It's like they just stood up in the middle of the night and vanished into thin air." The initial confusion of one ranger was about to blossom into one of the largest and most baffling search operations in the history of the National Park Service. The discovery of their absence was not a single moment of panic, but a slow, creeping realization of an impossible situation. The scene left behind wasn't one of violence, but of vacancy. It was a perfectly preserved diorama of a family's last happy moments, with the family itself inexplicably plucked from the center. The response to Ranger Miller's call was swift and massive. Within hours, the small, secluded clearing was transformed into a bustling command center. The Pierce County Sheriff's Office arrived, their jurisdiction overlapping with the National Park Service, creating an immediate, albeit subtle, bureaucratic friction. Search and rescue, SAR teams, composed of highly skilled volunteers and park staff, began to flood the area. The initial search strategy was based on the most logical assumption. The Allens had gone for a short hike and had become lost or injured. SAR teams fanned out in carefully gridded patterns, their brightly colored jackets stark against the gloomy forest. They started with the immediate vicinity, combing the dense undergrowth and scanning the powerful milky white currents of the White River. Canine units were brought in, their handlers letting them get a scent from the clothing in the tent. The dogs seemed confused, casting about in wide circles before appearing to lose the trail completely just a few dozen yards from the campsite in every direction, as if the family had been lifted straight up into the air. By late afternoon on the first day, the weather, which had been a miserable drizzle, took a turn for the worse. The storm front that Ranger Miller had warned about stalled over the mountain and intensified. The temperature plummeted, and the rain turned to sleet, then to a thick, wet, unseasonable snow. For August, it was a freak event, a meteorological anomaly that turned an already difficult search into a nightmare. The blizzard raged for 2 full days, dumping nearly 3 feet of snow at the higher elevations, and a thick, slushy blanket over the search area. All ground operations had to be called off. The command center became a tense waiting room, the hiss of the propane heaters mixing with the static of radios relaying grim weather updates. Rescuers, frustrated and anxious, could do little more than study maps and wait for a break in the storm. This 2-day delay was critical. It not only gave the elements time to erase any potential tracks or clues, but it also extinguished any realistic hope of finding the family alive if they were exposed and unprepared for such conditions. When the storm finally broke on the 3rd day, the landscape was transformed and treacherous. The search resumed with renewed desperation. Helicopters from the Naval Air Station on Whidbey Island joined the effort, their rotors thumping loudly as they performed low-level aerial sweeps of the vast, snow-dusted terrain. The family's relatives had been notified. Sarah's younger sister, Emily, arrived at the command post, her face a mask of disbelief and terror. She became the human face of the tragedy for the media, which had now descended on the park. She provided investigators with every detail she could, describing David's sometimes overconfident nature and his love for exploring off-the-beaten-path locations. She pleaded with rescuers, her voice cracking. "He's a good man, a good father. He wouldn't put his kids in danger. Something terrible has happened." Her growing frustration became a central conflict of the search. She felt the jurisdictional squabbling between the Park Service and the Sheriff's Office was wasting precious time. She argued with the lead investigator, a county sheriff's deputy named Mark Coulson, insisting they weren't looking in the right places, though she couldn't say where the right places were. Her desperation was a constant, painful reminder of the human stakes. The search methodologies were extensive and thorough. Teams rappelled into steep ravines, probed glacial crevasses, and used thermal imaging cameras during the brief windows of clear weather. They followed the river for miles in both directions. They searched every abandoned cabin and mine shaft marked on their maps, but they found nothing. Not a single footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not a discarded granola bar wrapper. The complete absence of any sign of the family was maddening. On the 5th day of the search, tragedy compounded the mystery. A search helicopter, a Bell UH-1 Huey, was maneuvering in a narrow, wind-whipped valley when its tail rotor clipped a large tree. The pilot fought for control, but the aircraft spun violently and crashed into the mountainside, bursting into flames. The pilot and a co-pilot were killed instantly, and 2 SAR spotters on board were critically injured. The accident sent a shockwave through the search effort. It was a devastating blow to morale, and a stark reminder of the dangers involved. The search for the missing Allen family had now created its own victims. After the crash, the intensity of the search began to wane. The resources were immense, but the search area was infinitely larger. Mount Rainier National Park covers 369 square miles of rugged, unforgiving wilderness. It was like looking for 4 needles in a continent of haystacks. After 3 weeks of intensive, exhaustive, and fruitless searching, the official operation was scaled back. A limited reactive search would continue, but the massive, coordinated effort was over. The failure was not for lack of effort or courage, but due to a perfect storm of confounding factors. The freak blizzard that erased the trail, the vast and vertical terrain, the complete lack of any starting clue, and a tragic accident that stole momentum and lives. The Allens remained missing, their fate swallowed by the mountain that David Allen had so deeply admired. The scaling back of the official search marked the beginning of the cold years. The case of the vanished Allen family transitioned from a frantic, high-stakes rescue mission to a lingering, unsolved mystery. The media packed up their vans, the command center was dismantled, and the forest around the White River fell silent once more. But for Sarah's sister, Emily, the search never ended. She became the keeper of the flame, a solitary figure refusing to let her family be forgotten. In the first year, she poured her savings into hiring private investigators and organizing volunteer searches. She plastered missing person flyers with the smiling faces of David, Sarah, Chloe, and Leo in every town, truck stop, and ranger station within a 100-mile radius of the park. She hounded the Pierce County Sheriff's Office for updates, her calls becoming less frequent but more desperate as the months turned into a year, then 2. The lead investigator, Deputy Coulson, would take her calls, his voice always tinged with a weary sympathy. He would repeat the same lines. "No new leads, Emily. We haven't forgotten them. It's an open case." But they both knew it was a dead case, a file gathering dust in a cabinet marked unsolved. The emotional toll on Emily was profound. Hope is a cruel companion when it has nothing to feed on. Her life became defined by their absence. Family gatherings were hollowed-out affairs, the 4 empty chairs at the table a constant painful presence. She found herself scanning the faces of strangers in crowds, imagining she saw a glimpse of her sister or a child who looked like Chloe. The not knowing was a unique form of torture, a wound that could never scar over because it was constantly being reopened by the sliver of possibility. Legally, the Allens were declared dead after 5 years, a procedural necessity that felt like a final, bureaucratic betrayal to Emily. The declaration allowed for their estate to be settled, their house to be sold, and their lives to be officially closed out. For Emily, it was just paper. In her heart, they remained in a state of purgatory, lost somewhere between life and death. In the local communities surrounding Mount Rainier, the story of the Allen family slowly morphed into a piece of grim folklore. Their vacant campsite became a dark tourist spot for a certain kind of visitor. Teenagers would dare each other to spend a night there, hoping to witness something paranormal. The story was told around campfires, embellished with each retelling. Some said they had been taken by a Bigfoot. Others whispered about a reclusive mountain man or a UFO abduction. The most poetic and haunting version of the legend dubbed them the sleeping family of the mountain, as if they had simply wandered into a hidden valley and fallen into an enchanted, unending sleep. Their disappearance became a cautionary tale for hikers and campers, a stark reminder of the wilderness's power to swallow people whole. The blue tent, the unlocked Subaru, the keys in the ignition. These details became iconic elements of the myth, symbols of a perfectly inexplicable event. The case represented a failure on every level. The initial search had failed, the investigation had failed, and time itself had failed to offer up any answers. For 9 years, the mystery of the Allen family lay dormant, frozen in time like the glaciers on the mountain that held their secret. The hope of ever finding a resolution had all but vanished, just as the family themselves had. The world had moved on, but for a small circle of people, especially Emily, time had stopped on August 14, 2012. The silence from the mountain was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket of uncertainty that seemed destined to last forever. For 9 years, the file on the Allen family disappearance sat in a steel cabinet at the Pierce County Sheriff's Office, its contents growing brittle with age. Then, in the fall of 2021, a new initiative was launched. A small, underfunded cold case unit was formed, tasked with reviewing the county's most baffling unsolved cases using modern technology. The unit was headed by Detective Isabella Rossi, a sharp, tech-savvy investigator in her early 30s who had a reputation for meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail. The Allen case was one of the first files to land on her desk. She spent a week immersing herself in the case, reading every report, every witness statement, and every speculative theory. She studied the maps of the search grids, the meteorological reports of the freak blizzard, and the heart-wrenching transcripts of Emily's early interviews. Rossi was struck by the same thing that had baffled everyone from the beginning: the complete and total lack of evidence. It wasn't a crime scene, it was a vacuum. As a digital native, Rossi's mind naturally gravitated towards the technological aspects of the original investigation. She noted that in 2012, the handling of digital evidence was far less sophisticated than it was now. Data was often compressed, stored improperly, or overlooked entirely. She was combing through a supplementary evidence log, a list of items and tips that had been deemed non-critical at the time, when a single line item caught her eye. It was an entry from the first week of the search. Item 113, SD card with photos. Received from hiker Marcus Thorne. Area, Skyline Trail. Photos reviewed. No relevance to case. Card returned to owner. The Skyline Trail. Rossi pulled up a park map. The trail was miles away from the White River campground, on a completely different face of the mountain. It was logical that the original investigators had dismissed it. Why would a tourist's landscape photos have any bearing on the case? But for Rossi, it was a loose thread. In a case with no threads, even one was worth pulling. She ran the name Marcus Thorne through a database and found him easily. He was now a retired software engineer living in Tacoma. She called him. Thorne, a man in his late 60s, was surprised to hear from law enforcement about the Allens after so many years. He remembered the day perfectly. He was an avid amateur photographer and had been on the Skyline Trail trying to capture the afternoon light on the glaciers. He recalled giving his SD card to a ranger, hoping something on it might help. He told Rossi he still had all his original digital files from that day, stored on a series of external hard drives. He was a meticulous digital archivist. "I never throw away a single raw file," he told her. "You never know." Rossi felt a flicker of something, not quite hope, but a surge of professional curiosity. She asked Thorne if he would be willing to provide the original, uncompressed raw files from that specific day. Thorne agreed immediately. He was happy to help in any way he could, even after all this time. A few days later, a data package containing several gigabytes of high-resolution image files arrived in Rossi's inbox. The catalyst was not a dramatic deathbed confession or a hiker stumbling upon a human bone. It was something far more modern and mundane, a data transfer. Rossi began the painstaking process of examining each photograph. There were dozens of them. Majestic shots of Mount Rainier, close-ups of alpine wildflowers, panoramic vistas of the surrounding peaks. They were beautiful, but just as the original investigators had concluded, they appeared to be irrelevant. They showed nothing of the White River area. But Rossi wasn't just looking at the subjects of the photos. She was looking at the data within them. She used specialized forensic imaging software to blow up the images to incredible sizes, pushing the limits of their resolution, searching for any anomaly, anything out of place in the deep background of the pristine landscapes. She spent hours staring at pixels, her eyes growing tired. She was about to give up for the day when she opened the last file in the folder. It was a wide-angle shot of a small, crystal-clear alpine lake, its surface like a mirror reflecting the sky and a distant rocky ridge. It was a stunning photo. Rossi zoomed in, not on the ridge, but on the reflection in the water. It was there that the 9-year-old mystery finally began to crack. Detective Rossi leaned closer to her monitor, her heart starting to beat a little faster. The reflection in the alpine lake was distorted by the gentle ripples on the water's surface. But modern software was designed for exactly this kind of challenge. She initiated an image stabilization and enhancement protocol, the computer working to correct the distortions and sharpen the pixels. Slowly, a clearer image began to emerge from the watery reflection. It was a vehicle. It was parked on a barely visible dirt track on the distant ridge, a place it clearly shouldn't be. It wasn't the Allen's green Subaru. This vehicle was older, boxier. It looked like a pickup truck, a pale, indeterminate color, possibly white or light gray, with a dark-colored cap over the bed. It was a ghost in the machine, a detail invisible to the naked eye in 2012 but clear as day. Under the lens of 2021 technology, Rossi felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was the first new piece of information in the Allen case in 9 years. It was something tangible. She immediately cross-referenced the location on a detailed topographical map. The ridge reflected in the lake was a remote, seldom used access route for park maintenance, leading towards an area dotted with old, defunct prospecting claims from the early 20th century. It was miles from the Allens' campsite, but it wasn't an impossible distance to travel. Her next step was to dive back into the park's records. She pulled the vehicle entry logs for the days surrounding the Allens' disappearance. She was looking for a match, a light-colored, older pickup truck. After hours of scrolling through records, she found it. A 1994 Ford Ranger, color listed as faded white, had entered the park the day before the Allens vanished. The owner was listed as Silas Croft, with an address in a nearby rural town. A note in the margin indicated he was a former seasonal park employee, terminated 5 years prior for insubordination and minor theft of park property. A background check on Silas Sully Croft painted a picture of a disgruntled solitary man with a history of grievances against his former employers. He had a few minor priors for trespassing and illegal trapping. He was a man who knew the park's back roads and hidden corners better than almost anyone. Suddenly, the Allen case had what it had never had before: a person of interest. Rossi, along with 2 other detectives, drove out to the address listed for Croft. It was a rundown property at the end of a long gravel road, cluttered with rusted machinery and scrap metal. An old, faded white Ford Ranger sat sinking into the weeds next to a dilapidated trailer. As they approached, a stooped, elderly man with a grizzled beard and suspicious eyes emerged from the trailer, holding a shotgun loosely at his side. It was Silas Croft. He was 72 years old, and time had not been kind to him. The detectives identified themselves. Rossi took the lead, her approach calm and non-confrontational. She told him they were reviewing an old case, the family that had gone missing up at White River 9 years ago. At the mention of the Allens, Croft's eyes flickered. It was a micro-expression, a flash of something, fear, recognition, that lasted less than a second, but Rossi saw it. Croft denied knowing anything. He claimed he was nowhere near that part of the park, that he just went in to do some fishing. His denials were rote, practiced. Rossi then played her card. She showed him a printout of the enhanced photograph. It was a grainy image, but the shape of his truck, reflected in the distant lake, was unmistakable. "Your truck was parked up on the old service ridge that day, Sully," she said, her voice even. "Miles from any fishing spot. What were you doing up there?" Croft's face paled. The color drained from beneath his weathered skin. He stared at the photograph as if it were a ghost. The sight of that image, evidence he never knew existed, seemed to break something inside him. His belligerent posture crumbled. His shoulders slumped. He leaned against the doorframe of his trailer, the shotgun now forgotten in his hand. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. It was an accident. The confession, when it came, spilled out of him in a torrent of long-suppressed guilt and fear. He told them he had been running a small, illegal gold mining operation in an old abandoned mine shaft up on that ridge. It wasn't much, just a bit of panning and sluicing, but it was his secret. That afternoon, he had been returning to his truck when he saw a man hiking towards the mine. It was David Allen. Croft panicked. He assumed Allen, a geologist who would recognize the signs of an active operation, was a claim jumper or someone who would report him. He confronted him. There was an argument. David, confused and trying to explain he was just exploring, pushed past him. In a fit of rage and paranoia, Croft grabbed a heavy rock and struck David on the back of the head. David fell, his body going limp. The blow had killed him instantly. Just as Croft was standing over the body, horrified at what he'd done, he heard voices. It was Sarah and the two children, who had followed David up the trail. They came around a bend and saw everything. The revelation was staggering. The mystery of what happened to the Allen family wasn't an encounter with the wilderness, but an encounter with the greed and violence of a single man. Croft, panicked beyond reason, knew he couldn't let them go. What started as a tragic accident spiraled into an unimaginable horror. He confessed that he hadn't acted alone, that his partner in the illegal mine had helped him with what came next. With Croft's confession, the what was finally solved. He then provided the final, crucial piece of the puzzle, the location of the unmarked mine shaft, where he had hidden the evidence of his terrible crime. The confession of Silas Croft sent shockwaves through the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. The 9-year-old cold case was suddenly white-hot. Based on his statement, a massive law enforcement and forensic recovery operation was mobilized and sent to the remote ridge Croft had identified. It was a difficult, logistically challenging location, far from any paved roads. The team found the spot exactly where Croft had described it, a collapsed mine entrance, deliberately dynamited and covered with tons of rock and earth to make it look like a natural rock slide. It was a tomb sealed for 9 years. An excavation team using heavy machinery began the slow, grim work of reopening the mine. As they carefully removed layers of rock and soil, the motive behind Croft's horrific actions became clearer. His confession had implicated an accomplice, a man named Dale Stratton, who had been his partner in the illegal mining operation. But more shockingly, Croft revealed that a third man had been involved in the cover-up. That man was Mark Coulson, the very same Pierce County Sheriff's deputy who had been the lead investigator on the Allen family's disappearance back in 2012. The conspiracy was as breathtaking as it was depraved. Coulson, who had since retired from the force, had been taking bribes from Croft and Stratton for years to look the other way on their poaching and illegal mining activities. When Croft called him in a panic after killing David Allen and seeing the witnesses, Coulson knew his own corruption was about to be exposed. The why was a toxic brew of greed and self-preservation. Coulson, from his position as lead investigator, masterminded the cover-up. After Croft and Stratton dealt with Sarah and the children, forcing them into the mine shaft with David's body, Coulson advised them on how to dispose of the evidence. They threw the family's day packs and Chloe's precious geology hammer in with them, then used explosives from their mining supplies to collapse the mine entrance. Coulson's role was to control the official narrative. He deliberately steered the SAR teams away from the ridge, citing the area as geologically unstable and full of old, dangerous mine shafts, framing it as a safety precaution when it was, in fact, misdirection. He was the one who downplayed the significance of Marcus Thorne's photographs, ensuring they were never properly analyzed. He used the freak blizzard as a convenient excuse for the search's failure, all the while knowing exactly where the family lay. The revelation of Coulson's involvement was a deep betrayal that explained why the initial search had been so spectacularly unsuccessful. It hadn't failed because of the wilderness. It had been sabotaged from the inside. Warrants were immediately issued. Silas Croft was arrested at his property. Dale Stratton was apprehended at his home in a neighboring county. When detectives arrived at the home of the retired deputy Mark Coulson, they were met with another grim twist. Coulson had died of a massive heart attack 2 years prior, taking the full extent of his secrets to his grave. Back at the mine, after 2 days of painstaking excavation, the recovery team made a breakthrough. They uncovered the first human remains. Forensic anthropologists were brought into the somber scene. Over the next several days, they would recover the remains of one adult male, one adult female, and 2 small children. Dental records provided a swift and positive identification. They were the Allens. The cause of death for David Allen was confirmed as blunt force trauma to the skull. The remains of Sarah, Chloe, and Leo showed no signs of similar trauma, leading to the horrifying conclusion that they had been buried alive when the mine was collapsed. The recovery team also found the tattered remains of their backpacks, and near the remains of the smallest child, a small, rust-covered geology hammer. The discovery brought the "what happened" question to its gut-wrenching conclusion. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media frenzy. Croft and Stratton were charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy. Faced with the mountain of evidence and Croft's confession, both men eventually confessed to the full scope of their crimes, detailing the final, terrifying moments of the Allen family. The case was officially closed, the mystery solved not by a stroke of luck in the wilderness, but by a detective's refusal to accept a cold case and the power of a single, forgotten pixel. The news broke on a crisp October afternoon. Detective Rossi made the call herself. She knew it couldn't come from a uniformed officer or a victim's advocate. After 9 years of silence, Emily deserved to hear it from the person who had finally uncovered the truth. Emily was at work, a quiet accounting office, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. For 9 years, every unknown call had carried a toxic mixture of faint hope and certain disappointment. But something made her answer. "Emily, my name is Detective Isabella Rossi with the Pierce County Cold Case Unit." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard from anyone on the case in years. Rossi's voice was calm, steady, and compassionate. She didn't soften the blow or draw it out. She told Emily directly, "We found them. We know what happened." Emily sank into her office chair, the world around her dissolving into a silent, blurry hum. Rossi carefully, gently, walked her through the discovery. The photograph, the truck, Silas Croft, the mine. As she listened, a storm of emotions washed over Emily. There was the tidal wave of grief, raw and visceral, as the finality of their deaths crashed down upon her. The tiny, flickering ember of hope she had unknowingly protected for nearly a decade was finally, brutally extinguished. For the first time in 9 years, she knew for certain that her sister, her brother-in-law, and her niece and nephew were never coming home. But intertwined with the suffocating grief was another, more complicated emotion: relief. It was a profound, bone-deep sense of release from the prison of uncertainty. The not knowing, the constant questioning, the phantom sightings, the sleepless nights spent imagining 1,000 different horrifying scenarios. It was over. The story had an ending. It was the worst possible ending, but it was an ending nonetheless. In the weeks that followed, the human element of the story returned to the forefront. The legal proceedings and the shocking details of the conspiracy faded into the background, replaced by the quiet dignity of a family finally being laid to rest. A memorial service was held in their Seattle suburb. The church was filled with friends, neighbors, and former colleagues who had never forgotten the vibrant family that had been stolen from their lives. Emily delivered a eulogy, her voice trembling but clear. She didn't speak of the crime or the men who committed it. She spoke of her sister's infectious laugh, of David's boundless enthusiasm for life. She told stories about Chloe's passion for rocks and Leo's love for his stuffed dragon. She brought the family back to life, not as victims of a famous mystery, but as the loving, happy people they were. It was an act of reclaiming their memory from the darkness that had shrouded it for so long. Later, after the legal proceedings had concluded, Emily, accompanied by Detective Rossi, made a quiet trip up to Mount Rainier. They didn't go to the crime scene on the remote ridge. Instead, they went to a beautiful viewpoint, a place where the mountain stood in all its majestic, terrible beauty. Emily placed a small, simple plaque she had made. It bore their 4 names and a single line: "Lost to the mountain, return to the light." As she stood there looking at the snow-capped peak, she felt the complex weight of her journey. The relief of knowing was real, but it was a cold comfort. It could not fill the void left by their absence. It could not bring back the lost years, the stolen future, the laughter that had been silenced. The resolution was not a happy ending, It was a sad ending that was preferable to no ending at all. It was the moment she could finally stop searching and begin, truly, to mourn. The resolution of the Allen family disappearance left a lasting legacy that extended far beyond the grief of one family. The case became a landmark in the field of criminal investigation, a powerful testament to the value of cold case units and the transformative potential of emerging technologies. In the wake of the revelations, the Pierce County Sheriff's Office, reeling from the betrayal of one of their own, instituted sweeping reforms. The most significant of these was what became unofficially known as the Rossi Protocol, a new standard operating procedure for the intake and long-term storage of digital evidence from the public. No longer would digital files be dismissed as irrelevant and returned. All digital media related to a major case would now be preserved in its original uncompressed format in a secure, searchable cloud database. This policy change acknowledged a fundamental truth revealed by the Allen case. Evidence that seems useless today may hold the key to a case tomorrow, unlocked by technology that doesn't yet exist. The story also served as a sobering lesson for law enforcement agencies nationwide on the insidious nature of internal corruption. The fact that Deputy Coulson had not only hidden his own crimes, but actively sabotaged the search for a missing family, including 2 children, highlighted a terrifying vulnerability. It prompted internal affairs reviews in several departments and renewed conversations about accountability and oversight. The broader themes of the story resonated deeply with the public. It was a chilling exploration of how a single, selfish act of greed, the desire to protect a small, illegal gold mine, could cascade into an avalanche of unimaginable evil. It demonstrated the terrifying fragility of life and how a dream family vacation could, through a chance encounter, turn into a 9-year nightmare. The narrative was a powerful commentary on the duality of the American wilderness. Mount Rainier, a symbol of natural beauty and recreation, was also the backdrop for a story of human depravity. It reminded people that the greatest dangers in the wild are not always the animals or the elements, but sometimes the other people you meet there. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was a human one. It was the story of Emily's unwavering devotion, a sister's refusal to let her family be erased. And it was the story of Detective Rossi's meticulous dedication, a belief that no case is ever truly cold, that truth can lie dormant for years, waiting for the right person with the right tools to uncover it. The ultimate lesson was one of profound tragedy, but also of quiet persistence. It affirmed that even when hope seems lost and years of silence have passed, the truth can still be found, sometimes hiding in the most unexpected of places, not under a rock or in a hidden grave, but in the faint, distorted reflection on the surface of a mountain lake. A family's dream vacation, filled with the promise of adventure, became a 9-year nightmare of agonizing uncertainty. The mystery of their vanishing was solved not by a massive search of the unforgiving wilderness, but by a single, overlooked reflection captured in a hiker's photograph, a ghost of a clue that waited patiently for technology to catch up to its secret. This case is a chilling reminder that the most terrible secrets can be hidden in plain sight, and that the quest for truth, no matter how long it takes, is a testament to the enduring power of love and memory. If this story resonated with you, and you believe that no victim should ever be forgotten, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with others, and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into true crime mysteries that were thought to be unsolvable. The actions of the corrupt deputy undoubtedly doomed the initial search, but there are still questions that linger. Tell us in the comments, do you believe the Allen family could have been found sooner if the initial investigation had handled the evidence differently from the very beginning?